Welcome to Bookish English 2.0, the place where stories teach you English. I'm Ariel, and today I'll take you on a journey full of adventure, danger, and lessons. This is the story of Treasure Island, told slowly and simply for you, my friend. So sit back, relax, and let's begin. A long time ago, in a quiet village by the sea, there was a small inn called the Admiral Benbow. It was a simple place, full of peace and ocean air. The sound of waves could be heard in the distance, and every morning the smell of salt drifted through the windows. A young boy named Jim Hawkins lived there with his parents. Jim helped his mother serve food and clean the tables. Life was calm, sometimes even boring. But one cold evening, everything changed. A tall, rough-looking sailor appeared at the door. He had a deep scar on his face and a heavy sea chest by his side. His clothes were old and dirty, and his eyes were full of secrets. He spoke in a rough voice and said he wanted a room and some rum. From that day on, he became a guest at the inn. His name was Billy Bones. Billy was strange. Every morning, he walked to the top of the hill with a telescope and looked far across the sea. He seemed to be waiting for someone or something. Sometimes he would sing old pirate songs in a loud, broken voice. The guests at the inn were afraid of him, and even Jim's mother didn't like him much. But Jim found him interesting. There was something about the old sailor that made him curious. One evening, Billy called Jim over and gave him a silver coin. He said, "Boy, keep an eye out for a sailor with one leg. If you ever see him, tell me right away." Jim didn't understand why, but he agreed. From that moment, the story began to grow darker. Billy often looked nervous. Sometimes he jumped at small sounds. Jim could see that the man was hiding something from his past. Weeks passed, and life went on quietly until one afternoon a strange man arrived. He was blind, thin and pale. His name was Pew. He spoke softly but with a cold voice. He asked to see Billy Bones. When Billy came, Pew handed him something small and round. It was a black spot, a pirate sign of death. Billy's face turned white. His hands began to shake. He tried to stand, but his heart gave out. He collapsed right there on the floor and never moved again. Jim and his mother were terrified, but they also needed the money Billy owed them. Carefully, they opened his sea chest. Inside were coins from many countries, a few papers, and one old map. The map showed an island and a big red cross in the middle. Next to it were strange words written in faded ink. It was a treasure map, the treasure of the famous pirate Captain Flint. Jim's heart was racing. He didn't know what to do, but he felt that this map was the beginning of something huge. He took it to Dr. Livesey, a kind and wise man in the village, and to Squire Trelawney, a rich gentleman who loved adventure. The two men studied the map carefully, and their eyes filled with excitement. They decided to find the treasure. Jim could not believe it. He, a simple boy from a small inn, was going to sail across the sea on a real treasure hunt. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change forever. A few days later, the plan was ready. Squire Trelawney arranged for a ship called the Hispaniola. It was a strong ship, ready for a long voyage. Captain Smollett, a strict but honest man, was chosen to lead it. Jim was invited to join as a cabin boy. His mother cried when he said goodbye, but Jim's heart was full of dreams. He wanted to see the world. As the ship left the harbor, the wind pushed the sails, and the sea whispered secrets to them. The adventure had begun, and none of them knew what was waiting on the other side. Pirates, danger, betrayal, and courage were all part of the journey ahead. But for now, Jim was just a boy standing on the deck, watching the shore disappear, feeling the thrill of freedom. That was the day Jim Hawkins left his quiet life behind and stepped into a story that would live forever. Chapter 2: The Ship and the Secret. The Hispaniola was ready to sail. The sun was bright, the water sparkled like glass, and the wind pushed softly against the sails. Jim stood on the deck, his eyes wide with wonder. He had never been on a ship before. Everything looked so big and alive. The ropes, the tall masts, the smell of the sea, the sound of waves touching the sides of the ship. It all felt magical. This was the beginning of a real adventure, and he could not stop smiling. The crew was busy preparing for the long voyage. Some men sang songs as they worked. Others laughed and told stories about faraway lands. But among them, there was one man who seemed friendlier and wiser than the rest. His name was Long John Silver. He had only one leg and walked with a wooden crutch, yet he moved fast and strong. He was the ship's cook, and everyone liked him. He always smiled, told funny pirate stories, and had a green parrot on his shoulder that kept shouting, "Pieces of 8, pieces of 8, eee!" Jim liked Silver right away. The man was kind to him, and taught him small things about ships and the sea. He said things like, "A sailor's heart must be strong, lad. The sea is a teacher." Jim listened carefully. He felt lucky to be around such an interesting man. Days passed and the ship moved smoothly over the blue water. The sky was wide and endless. Jim spent most of his time helping the crew, cleaning the deck, and watching the waves. Everything seemed perfect, until one quiet afternoon, when something strange happened. Jim was thirsty, and went down to get some water from a barrel. But when he bent down, he heard voices. He stopped moving and listened carefully. Inside the barrel, hidden in the shadows, Jim realized that the voices belonged to Silver and a few other men. They were speaking softly but with excitement. Jim's heart started to beat faster. Silver said, "When we find the treasure, we'll take over the ship. The gold will be ours, and no one will stop us." Jim felt frozen. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Long John Silver, the friendly cook, was a pirate. And not just him, many of the crew were pirates too. They had joined the voyage only to steal Captain Flint's treasure. They planned to wait until the treasure was found, and then take everything, including the ship. Jim stayed quiet inside the barrel. He didn't move or make a sound. His hands were shaking. He listened to every word, and when the men finally left, he climbed out slowly. He ran straight to Captain Smollett and told him everything. The captain listened carefully, his face serious but calm. He called Dr. Livesey and Squire Trelawney to his cabin. Jim repeated what he had heard. When he finished, there was silence for a moment. Then Captain Smollett said, "You've done a brave thing, Jim. You may have just saved us all." From that moment, everything changed. The good men on the ship now knew that many of the crew were traitors. They had to be careful. They made a secret plan. They would act normally, smile, and pretend they knew nothing until the right time came. Inside, everyone was afraid, but they stayed strong. The days felt longer now. Every laugh from Silver sounded fake. Every smile looked dangerous. Jim tried to avoid his eyes, but Silver seemed to know that something was different. He would sometimes pat Jim on the shoulder and say, "You look worried, lad. See life not what you expected?" Jim forced a smile, but inside he was full of fear. At last, after many days of sailing, a cry came from the top of the mast. "Land ahead! Eee!" The men ran to the rail. In the distance, they saw a green island rising from the water, covered with trees and hills. Treasure Island. The place that had lived only on the old map was now real and right before their eyes. The crew cheered loudly, but not all those smiles were friendly. The pirates were already dreaming of gold. The honest men looked at one another quietly, knowing a storm was coming. As the sun set behind the island, Jim felt a mix of fear and excitement. He didn't know what would happen next. He only knew that he was part of something much bigger than himself. The sea was calm that night, but in Jim's heart, a battle had already begun. Chapter 3: The Island of Secrets. The next morning, the ship dropped its anchor near the shore of Treasure Island. The sun was shining, and the waves were soft against the sand. From the deck, Jim could see the island clearly for the first time. It looked green and beautiful, but something about it felt strange. The trees moved gently in the wind, and the birds flew high above, but the island seemed too quiet, almost as if it was waiting for them. Captain Smollett stood near the wheel and looked at the land with a serious face. He said, "That's a fine place for an ambush." Dr. Livesey nodded slowly. Everyone knew what he meant. The pirates were still pretending to be loyal sailors, but the truth was waiting to break out like a storm. Squire Trelawney looked at the map again and whispered, "The treasure must be somewhere in the middle of the island." His hands were shaking, and his voice was full of excitement. But there was also fear. Everyone felt it. They were standing so close to adventure and danger at the same time. When the longboats were ready, some of the men were sent to the island. Silver offered to go first with a few others. Jim was curious. He wanted to see what the island looked like up close. So, without asking anyone, he quietly joined one of the boats. The ride was short, and the moment his feet touched the sand, he felt a new kind of freedom. The air smelled of salt and wet leaves, and the sound of insects filled the forest. But as he walked deeper into the trees, Jim realized he was alone. The others had gone in different directions. The forest was thick and dark, and strange noises echoed all around. Jim called out softly, "Hello?" But no one answered. Then through the trees, he saw movement. He hid behind a bush and watched. It was a man, thin and covered in dirt. His clothes were torn, and his beard was long. He looked wild, almost like an animal, but his eyes were kind. When the man saw Jim, he jumped in surprise, and then smiled weakly. "Don't be afraid, lad," he said. "I'm Ben Gunn." His voice was rough but gentle. Jim relaxed a little. "Who are you?" he asked. "I was a pirate once," Ben said, "but my shipmates left me here 3 years ago. I've lived alone ever since." He pointed to the hills and smiled sadly. "I've had plenty of time to think." Jim couldn't believe it. 3 years alone? How did you survive? Ben laughed softly. "I've got goats, coconuts, and fish. A man can live if he keeps his mind right." Then he leaned closer and whispered, "You're looking for Captain Flint's treasure, aren't you?" Jim nodded slowly. Ben smiled again. "I know where it is," he said quietly. "I found it a long time ago, but I couldn't carry it all. If you promise to take me home, I'll help you." Jim's heart beat fast. This was a miracle. A man who already knew where the treasure was. But he also knew he had to be careful. Not everyone could be trusted on this island. While Jim was talking to Ben, things were getting worse near the shore. The pirates had finally shown their true faces. They had taken control of the ship and were shouting orders, ready to fight for the treasure. Captain Smollett, Dr. Livesey, and Squire Trelawney managed to escape with a few loyal men. They found an old wooden house on the island, strong and safe, surrounded by trees. That became their shelter. When Jim finally returned to them and told his story about Ben Gunn, everyone listened carefully. The captain said, "If this man is honest, he might be our only hope." They decided to trust Ben, at least for now. Night came slowly. The forest grew darker, and strange sounds filled the air. Jim couldn't sleep. He sat near the window of the wooden house, watching the moonlight shine on the trees. Somewhere out there, Silver and his pirates were planning their next move. Jim whispered to himself, "I'm not afraid. I have to be brave." He didn't know it then, but his courage would soon be tested more than ever before. The island was no longer silent. It was alive with danger, secrets, and choices that would decide who lived and who didn't. Jim looked at the treasure map one more time and promised himself that he would see this story through till the end. He had started as a boy from a quiet inn, but now he was part of something much bigger, a battle between good and evil, truth and greed. As the waves hit the shore outside and the wind blew through the trees, Jim closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, "Tomorrow will change everything." Chapter 4: The Battle for Survival. Morning came quietly, but everyone knew the peace would not last. The sun rose behind the trees, turning the island gold for a short while. But inside the wooden house, the men were preparing for war. Jim helped Dr. Livesey check the guns, while Captain Smollett stood near the door, watching the forest. Every shadow looked dangerous. Every sound felt close. They knew the pirates would come soon. Long John Silver had shown his true nature. He was no longer the smiling cook with a kind face. Now he was a leader of dangerous men, strong, clever, and full of lies. He wanted the treasure, and he would do anything to get it. Jim sat by the window and looked outside. The trees were still, and the air was heavy. His hands felt cold. He had never been in a real fight before. He tried to stay calm, but his heart was beating too fast. The captain noticed and said, "Courage, lad. Fear is natural. The trick is not to let it stop you." Jim nodded quietly. Then it began. From the forest came the sound of shouting and running. Silver's men were coming. The first shot fired echoed across the island. Birds flew up into the sky. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. The pirates rushed toward the house, shouting wildly, their boots crashing through the grass and dirt. Jim held his breath as Captain Smollett shouted, "Hold your fire until they're close." When the pirates reached the fence, the captain gave the signal. The guns fired together, and the ground shook. 2 pirates fell immediately. The others screamed and ran for cover. Smoke filled the air. Jim could barely see, but he kept loading bullets like the captain had taught him. His hands trembled, but he didn't stop. The fight lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. When it ended, the pirates had pulled back into the trees. The air was quiet again, except for the sound of the waves far away. The men in the house were breathing hard, tired but alive. The captain looked around at his crew and said softly, "Good work, men. We're not beaten yet." Jim looked at Dr. Livesey, who was helping one of the injured men. His face was calm and kind, even in danger. That gave Jim strength. He realized that bravery wasn't about shouting or fighting. It was about staying calm when everything around you was falling apart. Later that evening, when the sun began to set, Jim walked outside for a short moment. The air smelled of smoke and wet earth. He looked toward the sea, where the ship lay far away, quiet and lonely. Something inside him said he needed to do more. The fight was not over. He remembered Ben Gunn and his promise about the treasure. Maybe there was still a way to win without losing more lives. He went to the captain and said softly, "Sir, I think I can help." Captain Smollett looked at him with surprise, but didn't say no. Jim continued, "If I can reach the ship, maybe I can stop the pirates from using it. They need it to escape with the treasure." The captain thought for a while, then shook his head. "It's too dangerous, Jim." But Jim couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, while everyone slept, he sat awake, watching the moonlight shining through the window. The sea looked calm, silver under the stars. His heart was full of fear and courage at the same time. He whispered to himself, "I have to try." When the others were asleep, Jim quietly took a small round boat from near the beach. He pushed it into the water and climbed in. The waves were gentle, but his hands were shaking as he held the paddle. He could see the ship in the distance, dark against the sky. Every sound of water made him turn his head. He was afraid that the pirates might see him. But he kept going, slowly and carefully. His arms hurt, his heart was racing, but he didn't stop. The moon guided him like a friend. When he finally reached the ship, he held onto the side and listened. The deck was quiet, but he could hear a man snoring somewhere. He climbed aboard, moving slowly, his feet making no sound. The ship smelled of salt and wood and something dark. Jim found two pirates on the deck. One was drunk, lying near the ropes, and the other was half asleep. Jim's fear turned into courage. He picked up a small piece of wood and hit the drunk pirate on the head. The man fell silent. Then he tied the other pirate's hands with rope. His heart was beating so fast he could barely breathe, but he had done it. He had taken back the ship. As he looked around the empty deck, the wind touched his face gently, like a whisper of victory. He sat down for a moment, breathing hard, staring at the horizon. The stars above him were bright, and he felt proud for the first time in his life. He whispered to himself, "I did it. I really did it." But far away, in the forest, Long John Silver was still planning his next move. The fight for the treasure was not over yet, and Jim's bravery had only just begun. Chapter 5: The Return to the Cabin. The sky was turning pink when Jim woke up on the deck of the Hispaniola. His eyes opened slowly, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Then he remembered everything. He had fought a pirate, taken control of the ship, and moved it to safety. He sat up and looked around. The sea was calm, and the island looked peaceful in the morning light. But he knew it was not safe yet. Somewhere on that island, Long John Silver was still waiting. Jim stood up and stretched his tired arms. His body ached from the long night, but his heart was proud. He had done something brave. He had protected his friends. He smiled to himself, but only for a moment. He had to get back to them. They would be worried, and the danger was far from over. He found a small boat tied to the side of the ship. He climbed in and began rowing toward the island. The sun was climbing higher now, and the air was warm and full of sound. The cries of birds echoed through the sky, and the waves splashed softly against the shore. As he reached the beach, he pulled the boat onto the sand and looked around carefully. The forest stood silent, hiding both friends and enemies. Jim started walking toward the old wooden house, where Captain Smollett and the others were hiding. His steps were slow and quiet. He didn't want the pirates to hear him. Every sound made him stop and listen. A branch broke under his foot, and his heart jumped. But there was no one there, only the rustling of leaves. When he finally reached the cabin, he was surprised. The door was open, and everything was still. He whispered, "Doctor? Captain?" But no one answered. His stomach tightened with fear. He stepped inside and looked around. The house was empty. The floor was covered in dust and footprints. Something had happened here. Before he could think more, he heard a voice behind him. Well, look who's back." Jim turned around quickly. It was Long John Silver. The tall man stood in the doorway, holding his crutch and smiling his cold, clever smile. Behind him were a few pirates, their faces hard and dirty. Jim's heart sank. He had walked right into their hands. Silver stepped closer, his parrot squawking on his shoulder. "You've been busy, haven't you, lad? Taking the ship, playing the hero." His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Now you're going to stay with us for a while." Jim didn't say a word. He stood still, trying to stay brave. Silver looked at him for a long time, then said, "Don't be afraid, boy. I've no reason to hurt you. Not yet." He laughed quietly and tapped his crutch on the floor. "You and I might still help each other." The pirates made Jim sit in the corner while they talked. He listened carefully. They were angry and tired. Many of their men were gone or too weak to fight. They had followed the treasure map and dug all night, but they found nothing. The treasure was gone. Jim smiled a little inside. He knew why. Ben Gunn had already taken it and hidden it somewhere safe. Silver noticed Jim's smile and said, "You know something, don't you?" But Jim stayed quiet. He had learned that sometimes silence was the best protection. The day passed slowly. The pirates argued, shouted, and blamed each other. Silver tried to keep control, but his men were losing faith in him. They were hungry and desperate. Some wanted to leave the island, others wanted revenge. Jim watched and waited, his mind full of plans. That night, the air was thick and hot. The forest around them was dark and full of strange sounds. Jim couldn't sleep. He looked at Silver sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. For a moment, he saw something different in the man's face. Not just greed or anger, but sadness. Silver was clever, but he was also tired of the life he lived. Jim almost felt sorry for him. In the middle of the night, a distant sound broke the silence. It was a whistle, soft but clear. Silver lifted his head and listened. He smiled suddenly and said, "That's them." Jim didn't know what he meant, but a few moments later, figures appeared between the trees. Dr. Livesey and the others walked out, calm and fearless. The pirates jumped up, ready to fight, but the doctor raised his hand. "Stop," he said. "We don't want blood. The treasure you're looking for is gone. You'll find nothing by digging." The pirates froze, confused and angry. Silver watched him with careful eyes. "Then where is it?" he asked slowly. Dr. Livesey looked at Jim and said softly, "Somewhere safe." Then he turned to Silver. "We can all leave this island alive, if you choose peace over greed." For a long time, no one spoke. The fire cracked, and the sea whispered in the distance. Then Silver sighed and nodded. "Maybe it's time to end this," he said. His voice was tired, but his eyes were calm. Jim felt relief wash over him. For the first time in days, he saw a small light of hope. Maybe they could still get home. Maybe this long, dangerous story was finally coming to an end. Chapter 6. The Treasure Revealed. The next morning was quiet. The rain had stopped, and the air felt clean and soft. The sea was calm again, shining under the pale blue sky. Jim opened his eyes and sat up slowly. He was still in the cabin, but everything felt different now. The fighting had ended. The pirates were weak and silent, and Long John Silver looked tired and older. For the first time since the adventure began, there was peace on the island. Dr. Livesey gave food to everyone, even the pirates. "We're all human," he said kindly. "Let's finish this journey with some dignity." Jim admired him. The doctor was brave in a quiet way. He didn't shout or fight, but he never lost control. His calmness made others calm too. Silver watched the doctor and smiled in his strange way. "You're a good man, doctor," he said softly. "Better than most I've met." Then he looked at Jim and said, "And you, lad, you've got courage. I'll give you that. You're no ordinary boy." Jim didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. They all went outside together. The air smelled fresh after the rain, and the trees shone with drops of water. The sky was clear, and the island looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But Jim knew this beauty had a dark history. The soil was full of secrets and greed. Many men had died here chasing gold, and some still might. Dr. Livesey said it was time to see Ben Gunn again. He was waiting in a hidden cave not far from the beach. They walked through the forest slowly, the sound of their feet mixing with the songs of birds. Silver limped behind them, quiet and thoughtful. His parrot sometimes spoke suddenly, breaking the silence with its shrill voice. "Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8!" it squawked. The sound made everyone nervous. When they reached the cave, Ben Gunn came out smiling. He looked happy and proud, like a man with a secret. "You're back," he said, clapping his hands. "I told you I'd keep it safe." He led them inside, his voice full of excitement. The cave was dark and cool, but when they lit their lanterns, the light touched something bright. Piles of gold coins shone in the shadows. There were silver bars, jewels, and boxes filled with treasures from many countries. It was more than anyone could imagine. Jim's mouth fell open. He couldn't believe his eyes. The treasure was real, and it was all here. Dr. Livesey smiled and said, "Ben, you are a true friend." Ben laughed loudly and said, "A lonely man learns to value what matters. Gold means nothing if you've got no one to share it with." Jim liked those words. He understood what Ben meant. All the danger, fear, and loss, they were not worth the gold. What mattered was friendship, courage, and doing what was right. They began carrying the treasure to the ship. It took many trips, and everyone worked together, even Silver. He joked and laughed, trying to act as if he had never betrayed them. Jim watched him carefully. He didn't trust him, but he didn't hate him either. Silver was complicated. There was something good in him, hidden deep inside. By sunset, most of the treasure was on the ship. The sea was calm, and the sky turned orange and purple. Everyone was tired but happy. They sat together, eating simple food, talking softly, and watching the waves. The long nightmare seemed to be ending. That night, Jim couldn't sleep. He walked quietly to the deck and looked at the stars. The wind touched his face, and the ship rocked gently. He thought about everything that had happened: the inn, the pirates, the island, the treasure, and the people he had met. He wasn't the same boy anymore. He had faced fear, made choices, and learned that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're afraid. Suddenly, he heard a small noise behind him. He turned quickly and saw Long John Silver standing near the ropes. His face was half in shadow. "You should be asleep, lad," Silver said softly. "I couldn't," Jim answered. "Too many thoughts." Silver smiled sadly. "You've got a good heart. Keep it that way. Gold can turn a man into something ugly if he lets it." Jim stayed silent. He knew Silver was speaking from experience. They stood quietly for a moment, both looking at the stars. Then Silver said, "When we reach England, they'll hang me if they can, but maybe I'll slip away before that." His eyes sparkled, and his lips curved into a small grin. "A man like me always finds a way." Jim looked at him, unsure what to feel. Silver was both a friend and an enemy, a pirate and a teacher. Before Jim could answer, Silver tipped his hat and walked away into the shadows. The next morning, the crew woke to find that Silver was gone. His small boat was missing, and so was one bag of treasure. No one chased him. They just stood silently, staring at the sea. Dr. Livesey said quietly, "Let him go. He's chosen his path." Jim nodded slowly. Somewhere out there, the one-legged man was sailing under the morning sun, still chasing dreams that gold could never truly give him. The ship was ready to leave, and for the first time, the wind felt friendly. The nightmare of Treasure Island was over, but the lessons it gave would stay with Jim forever. Chapter 7: The Journey Home. The sea was calm again as the Hispaniola began its journey back to England. The sails were wide and full, and the wind carried the ship smoothly across the open water. The men worked quietly, each one lost in his thoughts. The island was far behind them now, just a green shadow on the horizon. Jim stood at the edge of the deck, watching it disappear. A part of him felt sad, and another part felt free. Treasure Island had changed him forever. Dr. Livesey came and stood beside him. "Thinking, Jim?" he asked gently. Jim smiled a little. "Yes, sir, I was thinking about everything. About Billy Bones, about Silver, about all that gold. It feels like a dream now." The doctor nodded. "That's how adventures feel when they're over. But what matters most is what you learned." Jim looked at the sky and said quietly, "I learned that courage isn't about being brave all the time. It's about standing up even when you're scared. And I learned that money isn't treasure. People are." Dr. Livesey smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "You've grown up, Jim Hawkins." The days passed peacefully. The sea was kind, and the ship moved with the wind like a bird. Sometimes Jim helped the sailors, sometimes he just sat and watched the waves. At night, he would lie on the deck and look up at the stars. He remembered how scared he had been when he first left home. Now the same stars looked friendly, as if they were smiling back at him. Squire Trelawney often sat near the front of the ship, staring out at the water. He still couldn't believe that the treasure was real and that they had survived. "It feels like we've lived a whole lifetime," he said one evening. Jim nodded, understanding every word. They had all changed in ways they couldn't yet see. When the ship finally reached the English coast, the crew cheered. The sight of home filled their hearts with joy. The air smelled different, softer, familiar. The ship dropped anchor, and the men began unloading the treasure. There was laughter, shouting, and the sound of ropes and wooden crates moving across the deck. Jim looked at the gold and silver shining in the sunlight, but it didn't excite him anymore. It was just metal. The real treasure was what he carried inside him. The strength, the memories, the lessons, and the people who had stood by him when things were hardest. Ben Gunn stood on the dock, smiling proudly. He looked healthier now, cleaner, happier. "It feels good to be home," he said. "You can keep your gold, boy. I've got peace, and that's enough for me." Jim smiled back. He understood. Later that night, after everyone had gone to rest, Jim walked alone by the sea. The wind blew softly through his hair, and the moonlight made the waves shine like silver. He closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the water. It was the same sea that had carried him into danger and brought him safely home. It whispered stories of courage, fear, friendship, and freedom. He thought of Long John Silver. Somewhere out there, the man was still sailing, chasing dreams that would never end. Jim didn't hate him. He almost wished him peace. Silver had taught him something no one else could, that good and evil can live in the same heart, and every man must choose who he wants to be. Jim took a deep breath and smiled. He was no longer the boy who worked at an inn by the sea. He had faced storms, pirates, and fear itself. He had seen the darkness of greed and the light of kindness. He had learned that real treasure is not found in maps or gold, but in the people we trust and the courage we carry when everything seems lost. The wind grew stronger, lifting his hair, and the sea seemed to whisper, "You did it, Jim." He felt a warmth inside his chest, the kind that comes from knowing you've lived through something great. When he turned to walk back toward the village, he looked over his shoulder one last time at the endless water. "Goodbye, Treasure Island," he said softly. "Thank you for everything." And so the story ended. But in Jim's heart, the adventure would live forever. It would remind him that courage can grow in the quietest hearts, that kindness can win over fear, and that even the smallest voice can echo across the sea. He smiled as he walked away, the moon above him and the waves behind him, carrying the memories of a boy who had once gone in search of gold and found something far more valuable. Now, my friend, it is your turn to learn from this story. Keep your heart brave and your mind open. The world is full of adventures waiting for you, not with pirates or treasure maps, but with dreams, goals, and moments that will test your courage. Speak English with confidence, learn from every challenge, and never forget that your real treasure is already inside you. If you enjoyed this journey, stay with us at Bookish English 2.0, where every story teaches you something new. Subscribe, learn, and grow with me, Ariel, because every word you learn brings you closer to your own adventure.